and so forth, there's actually people who do that work, and my research firm is one of those that does that. So every large-scale study that my company's ever conducted that has been reviewed by the What Works Clearinghouse has fully met their evidence criteria, and we're the ones who really conduct a lot of those studies to say, okay, what impact do these interventions have? What works, what doesn't, what can be done to make them work better. So as part of that work, over the last numerous years, my work is increasingly focused on early identification and connection with services, because what I've found is that the reason why a lot of these programs and interventions are not having the intended effects are really not that those programs aren't effective. For example, the dropout prevention programs that are evaluated and so forth like that. But really the issue was that those programs weren't getting, and those services weren't getting to the students who needed them early enough. And that was the reason why they weren't having the impact on overall, district numbers, school numbers, and statewide percentages. So that's really where a lot of this work and research came out of that we'll be talking about today.
Great. And just to give you a little background on me, I'm Michael Klein. I'm an education research leader at Bytes. And before coming to Bytes, I was a teacher in New York City public schools, where I did a lot of work with third, fourth, and fifth graders, and it's a district where only about 50% of our low-income students of color graduate from high school. And so early warning became a big concern of mine in working with the younger students I was with, because you could even start to see some signs of risk there. But I knew there were many other students that weren't showing those signs that you might expect, that would still be facing some challenges in their academic careers. And through that work, I got connected with Tony Wagner out of Harvard, and did some research with him around what types of teaching and learning environments are most conducive to innovation and engaging students to make sure that they're on the path to success in college and career. And through Tony, I was introduced to the folks out at High Tech High in California. So I moved out to San Diego and helped open High Tech High School on the U.S.-Mexico border, where we focused on making sure that all of our students were college and career ready through project-based learning, and making sure that we identified students early so that we could provide them with the interventions that they needed to succeed. And I went from a district where we had about a 50% graduation rate to a district where we had a 98% graduation rate and 96% matriculation rate into college. And so just seeing how those two environments are very different, and the kinds of structures and supports that were needed, got me really interested in the idea of early warning and dropout prevention, which is what brought me to Bytes. And so as we work through the conversation today and look at the research with Dr. Azin, it'll be great if you can add questions, since there are so many people on the call. If you have a question, if you could just type it into the question box on the side, I'll make sure to address it as we go through, so that everyone has an opportunity to ask their questions and get them answered. So just to give you a little bit of background in case you're not as familiar with Bytes. We're a research organization that focuses on learning analytics, and we work with state departments of education, service agencies, as well as school districts. And in our work, our mission is to improve the way the world learns. And so we do that in three ways. We do that through having things that are educated. So educated, we always use research-backed frameworks. So we're not just going to take the data that you already have and make it pretty. We're going to figure out what is the best research around a particular topic like early warning, and how can we use that as a framework to best understand all of the data that we're collecting. And then the engaging part is presenting that information in a way that is intuitive, so that you can find it easily and make the experience really exciting. And then the last part is making it actionable. It's not enough to just know what the challenges are and to be able to identify why that's important. We then need to be able to take those next steps. And so we provide best practice recommendations for all of the pieces of work that we support. And our organization is made up of some amazing people like Hisham Anwar, who is our Chief Technology Officer, and he was the head of technology infrastructure at Singa Games. So it's took that system from 3 million active users to 300 million active users. So he really knows how to look at data and scale that infrastructure. We have great statisticians like Dimitris, who comes from MIT, lead, who's able to help us with the data science and really making sure that all of our data is pulled together in the right way. We have great folks on the design side, like Steve and Benita, and most importantly for this early warning module, we have folks like Gail Allen, who's great at taking that research and making it actionable, and being able to take high-level research and essentially translate it and make it easy to act on for teachers and administrators. And also Dr. Azin, who is a researcher, as she mentioned, around early warning and dropout prevention, who's really been our key supporter in thinking through early warning. So what we've been seeing through the work is that we know that everyone at the State Department of Ed and the schools is doing the best job they can to support all of our students. But we know that some students don't show the warning signs that you might think of for at-risk students. And so one of the major things Dr. Azin found is that obviously students can't benefit from services that they're not receiving. So a big part of the work is being able to identify students and do that early enough so that they're not off track or providing interventions for them right away. And so for some statistics to help us to understand kind of where we are, in 2012, the high school graduation rate for low-income students was lower than 80% in 41 out of the 50 states in the country. And for a particular case study of a district, we can look at one district in the West, that's a medium-sized district, and we're looking at a cohort of 2,500 students. And of those 2,500 students, 30% were at risk, about 750 of those students. And when we look at the ability to identify, only 10 of those 750 students were identified as at risk, which missed 98% of the students. And then only 5 of those 10 students were connected to services. And only 3 of those 5 students completed services. So the initial 750 students that should have been served, only 3 students completed services, so it's fewer than 1%. And the district is obviously, yep.
Oh, yeah. Well, jumping in on this one too, this phenomenon I've seen in a lot of our research in relation to a lot of different programs and interventions. So for example, most districts I work with have some form of tiered intervention services in place, be it RTI or MTSS and so forth. And oftentimes what we find is less than 20% of the students who actually qualify based on established criteria for Tier 2 intervention services actually get them. And so, again, it's not that those tiered intervention services are not effective, it's just that they're not getting delivered to the students who really need them. And despite the fact that a lot of times there were lots of signs and warning signs, but there are a lot of dots that aren't connected because there's not any sort of systematic infrastructure for connecting all those warning signs. Sorry, Mike, so you go on.
No, that's great.
Yeah.
And so what we're finding is that obviously every school and every district is different. And one of the big challenges is that up until this point, a lot of early warning systems have treated all districts as the same. But we know that a big district like New York City is different than even other large urban districts like Philadelphia. It certainly has different factors and different weights to those factors than a small urban district in a small rural district like somewhere in Idaho. And so what we're seeing is that in some districts, like a large district in the Southwest that we're working with, they purchased an early warning system last year that plugged into their student information system. And when they turned that system on, it actually identified 100% of their students as at risk. And so that wasn't actionable in any way for them. They were stuck trying to figure out, what do we do now? Because obviously it's over-identified students, and they're stuck trying to figure out what to do next. And so that's why we partnered with Dr. Azin. And so from Bright Bytes Labs, and that's the research arm of Bright Bytes, we have data scientists, like I mentioned, from MIT and Stanford and Teachers College. We have researchers internally and folks that we bring in, like Dr. Azin, to help us with that research, as well as practitioners from every level, from teachers to school administrators, district administrators, service agency and state level folks, as well as thought leaders like Bruce Dixon and Will Richardson. And so what we found, and what Dr. Azin can speak to here, is really the importance of predictive analytics, which really sets apart the work that we're doing from many other systems that are out there. So Dr. Azin, do you want to speak to this slide?
Sure. Hi, everyone. And so talking about it, when we talk about early warning, what we're going to talk a little bit about today are kind of recent developments in early warning systems and really comparing kind of different methods of doing that. And so one thing is that the goal with early warning systems or so forth is to basically have greater accuracy. That is, we want to really identify those kids who are truly at risk, not, over-identify or misidentify kids who are as being at risk who aren't, as Michael talked about. So you want to increase accuracy, and you want to do it earlier. And so that's really the goal of it. So what we've really seen with the research is that predictive analytics is really the next big leap in doing that. So the approach of kind of that we've been looking at is that the way that predictive analytics works is that it'll take your actual data, be it at the state or district level, and look at the students who actually dropped out. And then you can go back retroactively. So they say, okay, based on the data available, at the elementary level, at the middle school level, at the high school level, what would have been the best predictive model to have predicted those kids would have dropped out? And it will fit the most accurate model that would have predicted those kids based on the data available. So there's a number of reasons why this is going to, and what we'll show you is how much more accurate this method of doing this is, and other more generic approaches. But there's just a few kind of benefits that I'll go ahead and point out. One is that what Mike kind of alluded to is that it's customized. So, there's been a lot of research on individual factors that are related to dropping out. But the truth is the relative importance of those factors differ across settings or even levels, grade levels. So, for example, while mobility might be a major predictive factor in one district, it may not be an issue at all in another. And so, by creating these predictive models based on a district or state's actual data, it's going to accurately reflect the relative importance of those. So the other thing is a lot of approaches really only kick in maybe by 8th or 9th grade and above. And this is an issue because dropping out, what we know is a process. It's not an event. And one that often has its roots in, elementary school. And so by the time if you're an early warning system doesn't start kicking in until late middle or high school, it's really already a little late because dropping out is usually there's a long process of disengagement and disassociation with schools that occurs over a long period of time, and they're usually lots of fun. What we talked about is accuracy. Always you want to increase the accuracy. So the goal of a really good early warning system is that you want to focus your resources on the kids who are truly at risk, and we'll talk a little more about that. And then the other one is timeliness and actionable. So you need to get that information back in a way that's really timely and user-friendly. I've done a lot of work with research, and the one thing that has become increasingly apparent to me over the years is that you can give people the best information in the world, but if you don't feed it back to them in a way that is user-friendly and actionable, it doesn't matter. It won't be used in the way you intend. So going on to the next slide, Mike.
Before we go on, we actually got a question from a
Of
participant. And the person said, Dr. Azin mentioned picking the best predictive model. Is she saying that each customer has their own predictive model created?
That's a great question. That's great. Yes, absolutely. And what we do is actually, what we do is it'll automatically fit. If we plug in over a dozen different types of models, predictive models, and it will fit the best model that would have predicted those students. And so one thing too with using multiple models and having it fit that is that if I have an increase in accuracy of even 5% by using a range of different models, I might be talking about hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of kids. And so what we found, and I'll be kind of talking to you about that, is that we found our predictive accuracy, and you test that by looking at the kids who actually dropped out and say, how many of those would you have identified accurately? And how many kids would you have misidentified? That we found that the accuracy rate when it gets up to high school is 95% and above, up to 98%. In the middle grade levels, we're ranging in the mid 80%. The elementary levels very high as well, in the mid 70s. And one of the reasons is the amount of data, the type of data differs according to level. So at the elementary level, you're not going to have as many of those indicators, like for example, the high school level. So you're not going to have as much on whether they're on track for graduation or credit hours earned and so forth like that. You might have not as much academic data. But at the elementary level, you will have more data on attendance, behavior, and then maybe, hopefully, you'll have academic performance, maybe state assessments or district assessments. And so the amount of data at the different levels differs, and usually you get more data available. But still, you use, based on the data available, what would have been the best predictive model that would have identified those kids who actually dropped out? Great question.
And so maybe you can speak to this next slide about the early warning checklist approach.
Sure. And so when people think about early warning, a lot of times what they think about is kind of all fonts and kind of the first generation of what I like to refer to as the first generation of early warning systems. And I consider all of this fall fonts and the checklist approach was a huge development in education, a really positive development, because it did a couple of things. One is it really brought into application the use of research and those research-based factors that are related to dropping out. And a lot of times as a researcher, you kind of get frustrated because you see all this research, but you don't see it used in, real-world settings. So that was one thing. It put a focus on using research-based predictors. Second thing is that it really started putting a focus on proactive identification. So the one thing, like when I talk about peer interventions, which I'm always asked to, evaluate and so forth, what I've seen is that a lot of times kids don't get identified until they're tier 3.5 and above. And so it is so apparent you can't even ignore that. And so by catching them when they're just starting to show signs of risk and getting in intervention earlier, you're going to be much more likely to have that intervention be effective. And so it really focused on proactive identification. So that was two huge developments that the checklist approach and the first generation of early warning contributed. That said, the goal with early warning systems and anything else is to just always improve, to get more accurate and earlier. It's kind of like, laptops. They used to be big and you wanted them to get smaller and faster. So the next generation of early warning systems, the predictive analytics, there's several changes with it. So with the checklist approach, what I'm going to talk about, the way this is typically done is there might be, district or states that I've worked with might have numerous kind of checklists, 2 to 4 of them maybe. Maybe they see something like suspensions, how many required credits they've gotten, core courses passed, whether they've missed 10% of their classes and so forth. There's a list of different ones. A lot of times, those actual kind of checklists are really applicable at the high school level. So if you're using suspensions, for example, it's a relatively low frequency event. Required credits, that is something that really won't really apply as much to elementary school or core courses passed. And maybe attendance, a measure of attendance. So a couple things with that checklist approach. One is that you're going to have students who, first of all, maybe don't hit a threshold on any single indicator, but cumulatively they're showing signs of risk across multiple indicators. It's kind of like they're simmering, but they don't boil over in any one. So that you're going to have those students who don't hit the threshold. Or it's an interesting thing, the student was never at risk and then tomorrow they're all of a sudden at risk. It's not like they weren't at risk before. The other thing is, by using kind of individual checkpoints, it's going to be much less accurate because basically, for example, attendance by itself, may be a risk factor, but it's also how attendance interacts with academics. And then the other thing what we found with the checklist approaches is that what it tends to do is cast a very wide, generic kind of net, and it tends to inaccurately classify a lot of students as being at risk who really aren't. So, we'll kind of go into the next slide here. Here is basically, based on the research, it'll show the relative accuracy of the different approaches to early warning. Okay, so if you look at this, basically, if you look in the upper left-hand corner of this graph, that's basically perfect prediction. That means you have accurately identified all kids who dropped out, and you have not misidentified any kids, okay, as being at risk or not at risk who really were. You know, and so in the left-hand corner, that's perfect prediction. The dotted line across the middle of the graph is basically random chance. You're just guessing whether the kid will drop out or not. So basically, this pink dot here shows the checklist approach, the relative accuracy of the checklist approach, which is good. It's an improvement. It helps increase, you know, identifying those kids who are at risk. And this is using maybe up to 4 different types of flags. So different checklist approaches can have different ones, you know. And so the yellow circle is basically using predictive modeling and using multiple indicators of attendance, not just one. So again, you're going to be much more accurate if you use multiple indicators, not just a single one, like 10% of days or something like that. But if you use multiple indicators, and if you use it in a predictive fashion, using, you know, actual data, it's going to be much more accurate. It's just kind of like the same thing, like, you know, you're not going to make a judgment on a kid based on their performance on one test. You want to use, similar to this, you're not going to make a judgment of risk on a student based on 1 or even 2 indicators or a few indicators. More data is going to make it much more accurate. The blue circle shows that modeling using numerous behavioral indicators. So suspensions, expulsions, number of office referrals, major incidents, minor incidents, and using them again in a predictive fashion. The green circle shows using academic predictors, a range of academic predictors. So that could be state and district assessments. It could be failure of core courses, number of credit hours accumulated, if they're on track, all of those kind of types of things. So, and then the white circle up in the upper left-hand corner shows using indicators across all of those domains, attendance, behavior, and academics in a predictive fashion. You're going to be much more accurate because, again, the risk can be manifest itself across multiple domains. And by using multiple indicators across different buckets, attendance, behavior, academics, demographics, you're going to be much more accurate than using it in any single bucket or just using individual checklists. Are there any questions before I go on, or should I just go on? I can go on to the next slide then.
Yeah, there aren't any questions that have been asked. So.
Okay. Okay. Great. So this shows a comprehensive review by Bowers last year, comparing 110 early warning models, dropout models, across 36 studies. So again, if you look at the same graph, left-hand corner is perfect prediction. Okay? So the numbers on this graph represent 110 different approaches. The checklist approaches are all tend to be kind of around this dotted line, the random guess line here. Okay? All the ones kind of that are getting up in that left-hand corner are predictive models. Okay? What we did is actually we rolled out the early warning system in a statewide, and this is actual data based on 300,000 students, where we looked at the kids who actually dropped out and how many were accurately predicted. This shows the accuracy of the predictive model starting at grade 3 up to grade 12. We are using this predictive approach with data, you know, of the early warning, Clarity early warning system, using data across all of those buckets: behavior, academics, attendance, and demographics. So as you can see, as you get into high school, you're getting your perfect prediction. But even at the middle grade level here, you're pretty high, and even at the elementary, you're very high, much more accurate at the elementary level than the checklist approaches are at the high school level and in other studies. This kind of makes it come alive, this slide, on the difference between a checklist approach and the predictive analytics approach to early warning. And so what this is this is an actual kid who was flagged by the early warning system. And we just made a student name, Jack. But basically, this is a state that used they use a checklist approach, Dolphins approach to early warning, the first generation. And what they used is they looked at whether students missed 10% or more of days, whether they had 2 or more suspensions, and whether they had a GPA less than 2.9. You know, and so basically what you can see is Jack would not have hit the threshold on any of those items. Okay? But look at Jack's data across multiple areas. So he didn't hit the threshold on attendance, but he was 91%. He didn't hit that 90% bar. But he missed a lot of, classes the first 30 days of school, and his tardy rate. Look at his minor behavioral incidents and all of these other ones, his performance across these different, academic areas. So cumulatively, if you look at Jack, the 7th grade, you can see that he's at risk. The early warning platform will give the level of risk for each of the indicators, and we'll talk about that. We use up to 24. And risk levels in those domains, and then an overall risk level. So the other thing was the state's early warning system is it didn't kick in until 9th grade. So Jack wouldn't have been flagged. So this shows a little bit of what I was talking to this next one on the relative accuracy of the different approaches to early warning. So based on actual data, we did a comparative study, and what we saw is that the checklist approach, using multiple checklists, using that approach, only 40% of the kids who actually dropped out would have been flagged. Versus using the predictive modeling approach, 85% of those kids who actually dropped out would have been flagged. Now, this in the pink boxes, this is where you can really see where the main difference is too. That the checklist approach, as Mike says, kind of tends to over-identify. It casts a very broad, rough kind of net. And so it actually flagged 60% of those who were flagged actually graduated. So they weren't really at risk. Whereas the number of false positives, by false positives I'm talking about where you inaccurately flag a student as being at risk who really is going to graduate, is much lower in the predictive model, 15%. This is really important because if you have a system that flags the vast majority of your students, it quickly becomes not useful. Because the point of a system, early warning system, is you want to accurately differentiate between students, and schools and districts and states have really limited resources. So you want to target those limited resources at the students who are most in need of them. So, moving on. And Mike, I'll let you go ahead and talk a little bit about, take it a little bit from here.
Absolutely. So as Dr. Azin was saying before, the challenge is really not with oftentimes the quality of the multi-tiered systems of support. The challenge is really around the systems that provide accurate information around identification, referral and follow-up, and monitoring. And so those are the 3 aspects that we, with our early warning module, are addressing. So we're helping districts identify students earlier and more accurately. We're helping with the referral and follow-up processes for the people who are within the schools and within the districts to make sure that when students need services, they're able to refer them out and make sure that that follow-up occurs. And then from the monitoring perspective, we're helping all school staff be able to continue to see issues that arise for students across all the different kinds of behaviors that you might see and help them report those so that it gives us a fuller picture of the student beyond just our ability to predict their level of risk. And so here are some of the bigger pieces of what our system is able to do. So we're able to identify students that are at risk and make sure they're actually getting the services they need when they need it, so earlier on. We can increase referral follow-through. by easily seeing the progress on actions taken, and we can help determine which programs may or may not be working and affect change. And at the same time, we're able to automate the referral process and the follow-up process, so that makes that much more seamless, because that's a big challenge. And Dr. Azin, do you want to speak to that for a minute? Because I know that in your research you found that the referral and follow-up is a huge piece of the puzzle.
Sure, it is a huge piece. So as well as, basically you can put in the best programs in the world, but if you don't address the pipeline of how those students are going to get into those services and the follow-up on them, what you'll find is that a lot of times they're not getting what you think they are. So, so what we found really was that, you know, people are like, oh yeah, we're identifying the kids. So what we find is that they really are missing a lot of signs, and really because no one has the time to put all the pieces together. But then even if they are identified, you kind of figure, oh, you know, we'll put in all these services, and if you put in all the services, they all will come and they'll be fully utilized. And what we find is that, as well as what's the question of whether they're even identified, what we also find is that you lose a lot of kids every step of the way. So maybe a large proportion of those who are identified don't actually connect to the services, or they don't get the services you think they're getting. And so, again, it's not really that your programs and interventions aren't effective, it's just that they're not getting delivered with fidelity to the kids who need them.
And so this is the approach, this is the model that we use with 4 domains to really understand the factors that cause dropouts. So in academics, we're looking at 8 indicators. We're looking at assessments from the district and state level. We're looking at credits earned annually, as well as course grades across all courses, as well as core academic courses. I'm sorry, I'm getting a lot of background noise. Miriam, is that, maybe you could mute for a second?
Okay.
We're seeing grade retention, as well as the pass rate across all the courses, and the number of remedial courses the student has taken. And these are all pulled from the research as being really highly predictive indicators of whether students will graduate or not. In terms of attendance, we look at 3 indicators. We look at attendance in the first 30 days, attendance across the entire year, and the number of targets the student has. And in terms of behaviors, we're looking at 5 indicators. We're looking at major and minor behaviors, as well as office referrals, suspensions, and expulsion. And in addition to that, we round out the picture by looking at different demographic information, including whether a student has an IEP or a 504, whether a student is an English language learner, whether a student receives free and reduced lunch, which allows us to really understand in a very holistic way what are the profiles of students that are most at risk within the district, and also then allows us to filter and think about which students we need to support and also report out on in terms of state and district level reporting for No Child Left Behind, as well as ICDA.
And before we go on to this one, I just want to add a couple of things on this one. What you'll see is, based on the level, the relative importance and what data is available may differ. So at the elementary level, for example, the checklist approach only has maybe annual credits earned or core courses passed. But a lot of that data will be much less accurate or unavailable at the elementary level. But you usually will have state assessment data, for example. You'll have grade retention, you might have some of these other data points, you know. But as you get into middle school and high school, more of those data points will become available. But at the elementary level, the relative importance of the multiple attendance, indicators or the behavioral indicators might be, take on greater precedence or state assessment scores. So the models and what is important for this thing and the amount of data available will differ depending on the level. So that customization is what makes it so accurate.
Great, thanks for that clarification. And now this is how the work actually looks within the platform. So we think about school and district and state level administrators as fire marshals, because their job is a mix between fire fighting, so finding the issues that are the biggest issues right now and helping to put out those fires, and fire prevention, so making sure that we can lay the groundwork for policies and practices that can help us prevent those fires from being an issue in the future. So the top of our dashboard here, and this is a school level dashboard, is really about firefighting. So it tells us how many students we're looking at in school. It tells us the relative levels of risk of those percentages percentages of students. And then here we have an ordered list of the top 5 students who are at highest risk within the school. And the reason you see X's here is because at Bytes, we cannot see any personally identifiable information. So when we collect information, that information is encrypted with bank-grade encryption from the moment that it is collected, processed, and when it's addressed. So only people within the district or the state who should have access to that data can have access to that data. And so in addition to the firefighting work that happens at the top, we also have the fire prevention work at the bottom. So we take a look at which of the students are at risk in these different domains of academic attendance and behaviors, the domains that we can actually impact. And so here you can see the percentage of students that are at risk, as well as all of the indicators underneath, and be able to click through and understand for each of those indicators where the students in the school are. And on the right-hand side is probably the most helpful piece to be able to pull out at a high level. This is saying these are the 1 to 3 warning signs that are most predictive in this particular context. So we're looking at the school level now, but you can see the same kind of analysis at the district and at the state level. So when you're an administrator trying to plan interventions, you can see which are the things that are going to have the biggest impact on whether or not my students are continuing to be at risk. And so in this particular example, in this school, attendance in the first 30 days and overall, as well as major behaviors, are the most important things to work on. So when the principal is meeting with their RTI coordinator and the teachers that they're working with, they can really help focus on those aspects of the work to support and make sure that we're working on that.
And before we go on, actually, there's just a couple things I want to point out on that other slide as well. And that is, again, when I've seen the checklist approaches in the districts and the states that I've worked with, a lot of times the way that information is fed back is kind of in a spreadsheet format. And again, even though some information might be good, if you don't give it in a way that's usable, it really is not going to be used. The other thing is the key with being able to use it and provide that information in a very usable way is that you want to focus it on what you can do, and we'll be talking about that, and you don't want it to be a bad system. We'll talk a little bit about that. The other thing here that I'll point out on the screen is the improve analyses. So basically, the system automatically looks at the quality of data before it gets entered into any predictive equations. So for example, in one district, behavioral incidents might be a really important predictor, but maybe it's because that district really accurately, or that school accurately records that, while in another district, it might not be an important one at all because there's very poor data in that field. And so it'll actually tell you areas where, hey, there's a data quality flag you should look at. So.
Absolutely. And there was a question that came in that's a really good question. So I'm going to go on to the next slide and answer the question at the same time. So Pat was asking, can I assume the dashboard data is hand-entered, or is it compatible with other school data systems for automatically populating the information? So we actually can pull that information from either a student information system or from a data warehouse, or in some cases, we work with a combination of both. So that information is definitely not hand-entered. It's a very easy lift on the district's part. We just have an ETL that pulls that data directly from the system that you already have, and we work with the district to make sure that we're mapping that data appropriately to the types of factors that we need to pull.
And jumping on that one, that's what we found in our work is that there are all these warning signs. Virtually every school district or state, student information management system has these fields, but there's just no way to easily get at it and look at the relationship between them. And so while that data's been there, it's not been used in a way to really help those kids, even though there have been warning signs for years.
Absolutely. And another question came in from James Appleton, and he asked, are you characterizing this system as different from the first generation or ABC approach? Can you speak to that, Mary?
Sure. I think I had several slides that talked about that. It's very different in the way that while we still use all of the research-based indicators, we use up to 24 across multiple different domains: attendance, behavior, and academics. The other thing is we're not just using a checklist. Oh, did they hit this bar? We're using it we're actually fitting predictive models, looking at your kids that actually dropped out and said, okay, which predictive models using these research-based indicators would have most accurately predicted those students. And so that one graph where I showed the percent accuracy, your accuracy is almost twice as good as with many checklist-based approach models, because you're modeling it based on those kids who actually dropped out, and it takes into account the relative importance of those factors in your setting.
Yeah, and I would add,
it?
yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the most important pieces that I was learning about when I first started to learn about the system was that not only is the approach and the predictive model customized at the district level, but it's at the grade level within the district. So that model's going to look different for third grade than it will for 12th grade. And
absolutely.
so that's really
Part
important.
of that is because the amount of data, the type of data available is different. So if you're using 4 checklist approaches, suspensions and core courses passed and so forth, that'll be a relatively low frequency event in elementary school, not very important, not very useful in differentiating, but maybe it's going to be all those multiple attendance indicators, behavior indicators, the performance at third grade state assessment. If you're a couple grade levels behind on literacy, that's strongly related and so forth. So.
Absolutely. And this screen that we're showing here is actually, from my perspective, as a person who's been a teacher and a coach in a school, probably the most helpful screen. So this is the risk prediction tool, and this really helps us drive decision making at the state, district, and school level. And so what you're seeing here is the number of students, their levels of risk, and then across which grade levels this is happening. And what we can do is, in my experience in RTI meetings, you would sit around with a spreadsheet and say, okay, here are the students that are going to get services, they hit this threshold, here are the students that aren't going to get services, and it was really hard to figure out where that line was. And so we always knew the kids that had the highest level of risk because they were showing either major academic signs of risk or major behavior signs of risk. But there were a lot of students who can kind of fly under the radar who can be at risk but just aren't showing those signs. And this is a really easy way of starting to address that. So here, you can actually slide this slider. So if you just wanted to focus on students that are at a medium level of risk, you can then just put it here, and you can see now across the different grades how many students are at medium risk. And then it'll also have an ordered list at the bottom, going from the highest level of medium risk down to the lowest level of medium risk. So when you're starting to plan those interventions now, you can say, okay, these are the kids that usually fly under the radar, how can we provide supports to them? And in addition to that, we have advanced filters, which from both just an academic perspective, but also a reporting perspective is very helpful. Because now I can say, okay, here are the students at medium risk. Can I just see the students who are free and reduced lunch and also have IEPs around them? So I can know that I'm really addressing their particular needs, and you can filter across any of the demographic information that we collect from, as Miriam was mentioning before, mobility, IEPs, 504s, English language learners, and all those different pieces, which then becomes very helpful for reporting for No Child Left Behind IDEA. As we go on to the next slide, you'll also be able to drill down to the student level. So here you're able to see an academic that this 4th grader is at low risk for academics. But here under attendance, the students at high risk, and for behavior, they're at medium risk. And so here we see that the interventions that are going to make the most sense for the student are around improving their attendance in the first 30 days and overall. And so at the bottom, you start to see ways that we link out and start to provide insight for next steps that you might take with that student. And we'll talk about that more in a second. You can also see that in the aggregate at the school level, for each of the indicators that are important. So we saw that for this particular school, attendance in the first 30 days was a really big challenge. And so here we have to research for why it matters to help people within the school understand why we really need to be working on that measure. We also have the data for the school. And here where it says save, you can actually snip this image. And if I was a principal, I could put this into a PowerPoint that I would then present to my staff to help them understand what this data looks like at our school in a really easy to understand way. And then I can actually click right here on View Insight, and that will take me to some actionable next steps that you can take. And so here we provide different kinds of interventions. We have quick wins, which are things that can be done in the course of a week or a couple weeks within the school or the district that can really help to support students quickly. We have game changers, certain interventions that might take longer, a month up to a whole semester, to be able to really have that bigger impact. And then in innovators, those are people who have been really successful in creating these types of interventions, whether it's a multi-tiered system of support or other types of interventions. And we provide you with their contact information, like a Twitter handle, and then link out to their resources to make sure that you can follow the work that they're doing and be a part of that community.
And if I can jump on this one, this
Sure.
is a big one. This is what really made me excited as, 20 years of research in the field is that I've worked with states who had these early warning systems. And I remember having a data person talk to me and they're like, our intent was not to give districts the bad kids list. And despite all of the training that they were doing with them, unfortunately, some of those districts, some people were misusing that data. So you have to always be aware of how data can be misused. So what I really love about this is by looking at, okay, look, the area that we're seeing the most growth is in attendance, and then pairing it up with research-based interventions. This is what you can do. You keep it on a very positive, help support-based approach. And you're not just coming up with a bad kid list. You're saying, okay, these are where the signs of risk are. These are what the patterns are. These are what the research-based interventions are. And you're connecting it directly to action in a really engaging, actionable way. And that's always where I've seen a lot of the holes when I've evaluated a lot of programs.
Yeah, and another big piece to making sure that the system works is not just being able to identify, but also having a tool that allows you to refer and follow up on the support that students need. And so we've created a referral management tool that allows whoever is the stakeholder within the school or the district or the state to be able to refer students out for services. And so if students were in need of psychiatric services, it's really important to know that they've gotten those services provided to them. So it'll be a way that creates a much easier path for communication between school and external providers. It'll provide an opportunity for follow-through so that students who aren't receiving the services they need are getting the support from the counselor or from the principal or whomever needs to step in to help them get that support. And then it also ensures that the resources are deployed in a timely manner, because obviously a lot of the issues that come up that require referrals out for services are urgent issues. And it's important to get those services to students right away to make sure that it has the intended impact. And the other piece that ties it all together is empowering teachers and school staff with real-time behavioral and concern reports. So as issues come up, and they could be concerns about a student's health, they can be concerns about a student's safety or about Bytes or any other kind of thing that could come up in the course of the day for a student, teachers can then enter that information in about 30 seconds using the 5 W's. So who was involved, what was it about, when did it happen, where did it happen, why did it happen? And that's a really important thing, because what we find is that a lot of times as a teacher, it was very hard for me to find the time to get out a disciplinary referral and write out all the information for everything that was happening. And those systems only really caught negative behaviors. They didn't catch a lot of the other things that maybe fall through the cracks, like if a student is starting to show signs that they're coming to school unkempt, so there are things that are happening in their lives that are changing that aren't disciplinary referral. And so this is a place to capture all that information. Do you want to speak to that, Dr. Azin?
Yeah, so let me jump a little bit on this. So as you see in our predictive models in the early warning system, basically, of course, the one thing that it's related to is the quality of data going into it. So one thing that this came out of, the development of this, portion of the system came out of, is that we found that by far the area where the poorest data tended to be was in behavioral incidents, on behavior, minor behaviors, major behaviors, super inconsistently recorded. The categorization as major or minor was really poorly done, and so forth. Now, the interesting thing with that is that virtually every district I'm working with nowadays tells me that they have positive behavior supports in place. And so if many of us know about positive behavior supports, you really cannot have the impact that this initiative is supposed to have if you have poor behavioral data. And one of the main things with why that behavioral data is so poor is that a lot of times only a single person is empowered to enter it into the office. So if something happens on the playground, on the school bus, something like that, they're not going to go in and say it, and it just doesn't get reported. So by making a very easy thing where, okay, an incident happened, you can submit it in less than 20 seconds, it's going to increase the accuracy of that happening. The second thing is to have a process for submitting social or emotional concern. So if a student behaves, if they're not doing anything, if it's not any sort of behavioral incident, but there's been a real change in affect. Maybe all of a sudden they're becoming very withdrawn, something like that. Maybe it's nothing, or maybe the child, saw their parent try to, kill themselves the day before. I've seen all of these things. Not your job to diagnose. You're just noticing something is different in that child. And by having a tool like that where there's kind of all eyes, not just a few, because maybe it's the band teacher who knows that child the best, maybe it's their coach, then you can just submit a concern and it can get forwarded on to whoever it needs to. And this is a big one because that's another sign of risk, but it's not something that's in your school information management system. You might have data on, academics, attendance, and behavior, but concerns, social or emotional concerns, which is a major sign of risk, are not captured in them. So this also gets at that, and again, creates a more holistic approach to early warning. And Mike can talk about how this all kind of feeds together on the dash in terms of those concerns and incidents.
Absolutely. So one great question, Scott Coleman just asked a question that anticipated what I was about to say, which is perfect. So he asked, does the real-time reporting backfill into the student information system? So the way that the two systems are set up, the behavioral reporting and the referral management, they're set up separately from the system so that all that data is held in the platform. So all that information will show up on the student page. So each student has an individual page that shows their risk factors across all the domains, as well as all of the incidents that have been coming up for them, so that you get a really holistic picture when you need to talk about a student. But we can then, through the creation of a CSV file or other ways, be able to take that information and then push it back into the student information system. What we found is that some districts are really interested in doing that, and other districts aren't. So the capability is there, just requires some conversation during the discovery process about how that would map back to the different fields within the student information system. But that's absolutely possible. And so I'd say the thing that draws everything together is, so if I'm a teacher on the ground and I see that a student is, like Miriam said, having a major change in affect, I can then report that concern through the concern reporting tool. That then goes to the platform and allows the counselor and the principal to be able to see that information as well. So we have our next meeting, we decide that that student needs to be referred out to counseling. We can make that referral through the referral management tool and track that the follow-up has happened. And then we can also see how that affects the other things impacting risk for that student. And so it's a really holistic way of understanding and connecting all the stakeholders within the school to create that safety net that catches all kids. And so I think that's what's really different about the way that we're doing work here. And so that's pretty much the end. I'll spend one slide on security because it's really important to us. So we are compliant with HIPAA, FERPA, COPPA, and CIPA. So all the different things with ends in A and our acronyms. And so student information is never exposed. As I mentioned, we use end-to-end encryption. It uses bank-created encryption technology, so data is encrypted during collection, transfer, and at rest. We use role-based access, so access levels of individual users can be configured by the administrators for each secure clarity instance. So we can provide access to everyone within a particular role, and also map it differently because one example that's come up is certain districts have counselors at high school level who have students in a particular grade. Other schools organize it by last name and across all the groups. So we can map it to whatever makes sense for the district to make sure that people can see the students that they serve and effectively make those interventions. And the last thing is that our data is never shared, disclosed, or sold. So this data is just for the purpose of understanding the risk factors for the students within your context, whether it's your state, your service agency, your district, or your school. And that data always stays secure within our system. And so I'll leave a minute for questions at the end. And in terms of contact, you can reach me, and I'd be a great point of contact. And I'm going to put my email into the chat box so everyone can see it, and they can be able to take it from here. And it's Mike@brightbytes.net. And from there, I can either answer any questions that you might have, or I can set up a conversation between two of us and Miriam so that she can help us figure out any questions related to the research that you might still have. Were there any things you wanted to close out with, Miriam, that you think are important to mention at the end?
No, I just think I'm excited to have the opportunity to kind of talk with everyone, and what I'm hoping to see is that eventually most schools or districts in this country have some sort of infrastructure for early identification and support. So I'm happy to help talk with that and talk about the research about it and anything I can do to help promote that.
Wonderful. And one last thing I wanted to mention is that we're going to make some of the presentation available so that if you missed the beginning of it or you want to share with other stakeholders within your community, you would be able to do that. So we will send that out to the list. And if you're interested in getting that, just email me at mike@brightbytes, and I will make sure to get you that information. We don't want to send it to everybody, just people who are really interested in that. So with that, I would say have a wonderful day, and good luck with the rest of your week. Bye.